Welcome back, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for today's explainer. We're going to be digging into an incredibly dense, just truly fascinating piece of economic literature today. It's an article titled Unequal Work, Unequal Pay Realities by the brilliant Nigerian author and researcher Oluyomi Oladevid. If you're someone who loves getting into the weeds on the mechanics of labor, gender dynamics, and global economics, you are going to absolutely love the way she breaks down these massive systemic issues into a really structured, logical framework.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for the explainer today. First, we're going to look at her assessment of the unequal work reality. Then, we'll explore power and unpaid care. Third, we'll walk through 5 crucial questions she poses. Fourth, migration as a spatial shift. And finally, balancing global development.
But before we get to the core arguments, let's briefly look at the mind behind them. Oluyomi Oladevid is a Nigerian author with a really deep, passionate focus on global development. She doesn't just want to study economic disparities, she wants to actually generate actionable solutions. Her ultimate goal is to influence real-world policy strategy. And by understanding her background, we can really start to appreciate the unique macro-to-micro perspective she brings to this whole analysis.
I wanted to pull this direct quote from her bio because it just sets the perfect tone for what we're about to explore. She states, "I am concerned about global development and transformation. I enjoy generating solutions, influencing policy/strategy, and providing clarity." And honestly, that word, clarity, is exactly what she brings to the often murky waters of labor economics. She takes these incredibly complex realities and just makes them understandable for us.
So, Section 1. The unequal work reality, the dual burden.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it visualizes the distinct dual burden women often bear wherever patriarchal norms dominate a society. On one side, you've got informal, unpaid care work happening within the household. On the other side, there's formal, paid work happening within corporate environments. She notes that while men and women are wired differently by nature and nurture, it's really these dominating societal norms that essentially mandate this double duty for women. It ends up splitting their productive hours across 2 vastly different and wildly unevenly compensated spheres.
Moving on to Section 2, Power and Unpaid Care, a Paradox of Effort.
Take a look at her incredibly unique definition of power here. She defines it as the ability to make game-changing decisions that impact wide-ranging outcomes. But here is the fascinating twist she introduces. She observes that powerful people, and this means both male and female, actually tend to supply greater productive hours to community work over the course of a lifetime compared to those who are socially perceived as powerless. It's a total paradox of effort. The people with the power to make these big, game-changing decisions, they are often the exact same ones carrying the absolute heaviest overall burdens of productive community labor. And this brilliantly illustrates her proposed solution at the micro level. See, macroeconomists usually focus strictly on broad policy coverage alternatives, right? But she takes a completely different angle. She theorizes that we actually need to focus on providing more household finance options. When you give families better financial tools, those empowered households can organically create new incentives. By making their own rational, empowered choices, these households can actually begin to narrow the gaps in unequal work themselves, literally from the ground up.
Section 3. 5 crucial questions, deep inquiries. Let's take a beat here because she poses some really heavy research queries.
Question number 1. Who pays for the necessary extra care work burdens that women tend to bear? This is a direct hit at the hidden economic costs of unpaid labor. Think about it. If this care work is fundamentally necessary for society to function, why is the financial burden so heavily skewed, and who is ultimately subsidizing this massive invisible economy?
Question number 2 looks at the cultural roots. What sort of cultural paradigms are necessary to break the gender entitlement bias in human communities? Notice that she isn't just asking for policy changes here. She is asking what kind of fundamental societal paradigm shifts actually have to occur so that this deeply ingrained entitlement bias is finally broken for good.
Now, her third question is a little bit more academic, so let's unpack it. How may households process the output of well-adjusted offspring educated for global relevance and premium productivity? Put into everyday terms, she is asking about the sheer incredible effort it takes to raise the next generation. How do families actually manage the monumental task of producing children who aren't just surviving, but who are educated for intergenerational equity and premium global productivity? Question 4 brings us right back to institutional action.
How can affirmative action and family-friendly policies bridge the unequal pay gap across developing countries? She points out something crucial. As the gender gap in education narrows, a pervasive culture of family-friendliness isn't just a nice-to-have perk anymore. It actually becomes an absolute economic necessity if we want to bridge these pay disparities.
And finally, question 5. What roles are flexibility-inspired global value chains playing in the game of rational choice by households? Essentially, how do modern, super flexible, globalized business structures impact the daily, rational choices that families are making sitting around the kitchen table? How does global business directly impact household survival?
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this all builds. Migration as a spatial shift, brain drain, and remittances. So when local economic environments are unfavorable and social security is inadequate, families make a rational choice. She calls this a spatial shift. Skilled workers migrate from developing countries over to the world's most family-friendly countries in the global north. Now, this creates a really complex economic reality. On one hand, you have steady remittance flows, money being sent back home, which she notes proved incredibly resilient even through the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. But on the flip side, in the short to medium term, the originating countries suffer massive human capital losses. This brain drain is highly retrogressive for local development.
Which brings us to our final act, Section 5, Balancing Global Development, Balancing Borders.
She outlines a very specific 3-step formula here for stimulating balanced development across borders, rather than just endlessly treating the symptoms. First, she says we absolutely must prime local culture pumps, meaning we have to do the hard, messy work of shifting those local cultural paradigms we talked about earlier. Second, we have to think, invest, and grow to equate what she calls balance edge practices. And third, we must enable connective infrastructure. It's a completely holistic approach. You can't just fix the money, you have to fix the culture, the investment strategy, and the physical and social infrastructure all at the exact same time.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought based on her call to action. How can we think, invest, and grow to stimulate balanced development across borders? Oluyomi Oladevid makes it crystal clear that we absolutely have the capacity to do this, and more importantly, that we should. I highly recommend diving deeper into her original writings if you haven't already. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep asking the big questions, and I will see you next time.